Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus. February is Women in Horror Month, so I thought I would take the opportunity to recommend a bunch of horror books written by women and a bunch of horror films directed by women. This is definitely not any kind of definitive list, just a handful of recommendations that I have personally enjoyed. So I have 10 books and 10 films to talk about, and I'll start off with the books. And anyone who is already familiar with my channel knows exactly who I'm going to mention first. It is, of course, Kathy Koja. Queen Kathy, whose debut novel, The Cipher, is one of my favourite horror novels of all time. It's about a couple of characters who find a hole in an apartment building and they become obsessed with it, and it follows how it affects both of them and other people. It's dark and unique and strange, and I love it. And it was finally reprinted last year, so you can get your hands on a nice new paperback copy if you wish. And I believe it's also available in ebook and audiobook form, so you really have no excuse to not read The Cipher now. And if you want to start with something else by her, I would recommend her recent collection of short stories, Velocities. With it being a short story collection, it gives you a really great range of her storytelling, so highly recommend this one too. Next up is Black Ambrosia by Elizabeth Engstrom. This is a unique vampire story following a woman who believes she is a vampire, but is she actually? Is there such a thing? Or is it all in her head? This is another dark and strange one that I really enjoyed. Next is the Danielle Kane series by Margaret Killjoy. There are 2 books in the series so far. The Lamb Will Slaughter the Lion and The Barrow Will Send What It May. They follow a group of travelling folk and the various demons that they encounter, and it's just a really unique series. I'm not even a big fan of series, but if there is a book 3 that comes out, I would absolutely pick that one up because I really enjoyed books 1 and 2. Next is Brother by Anya Alborn. This is about a family of cannibals who live in the backwoods, and one of the family, a teenage boy, is starting to question the things that his family does, and he meets this girl in the local town and starts to fall in love. And yeah, this follows how that plays out. While this one does have its gruesome moments, it's also very character focused too, and yeah, just a really brilliant read. Next is Now You're One of Us by Asa Nonami. This is about a woman who gets married and moves in with her husband and the several members of his family, and they seem very lovely and welcoming at first to her, but there are some strange things that happen too, and she begins to suspect that all is not quite right behind the scenes. This is another one that I thoroughly enjoyed. The atmosphere and the writing were all fantastic, and yeah, the story went somewhere that I was not expecting. Next up is Ruby Jean Jensen. She wrote a ton of horror novels, and I've read a handful so far and enjoyed all of them. My favourite so far is this one, Wait and See, which is a tale of supernatural revenge. Amongst other things, Ruby Jean Jensen also wrote a few creepy doll stories, so if that sounds like something you would be interested in, then she definitely has a few to choose from, like Mama and Annabelle. Whatever you pick up, I just definitely recommend her. Next up is What's Wrong with Valerie by D.A. Fowler. This is about a woman who inherits a house from her grandmother, and she starts seeing some strange things in there. But are they really there, or is this all in her mind? Either way, things get out of control, and yeah, this is just such a unique story, and Fowler has such a unique voice. It's dark and disturbing, but also with a very dark sense of humour. She absolutely deserves to be better known than she is. Next is The Red Tree by Caitlin R. Kiernan. This follows a character who moves into a remote house in order to focus on her writing, and while she's there she finds a manuscript written by someone else who had stayed in the place, all about a tree on the property and the local legend surrounding it. And yeah, this one is beautifully written. It has a really interesting mix of like weird fiction and some folk horror. Do not be fooled by this paranormal romance looking cover. This is an absolutely stunning read. Next up, if you're looking for some extreme horror, I would recommend Cockblock by C.V. Hunt. This follows a couple who find themselves caught up in a situation where all of the men have turned incredibly violent, and there are just violent and sexually violent attacks going on left, right and centre, and this couple are just having to try to survive. So yes, there's a lot of graphic, sexual and violent content in here, so if that's not your cup of tea, then this might not be for you, but I thought this one was fantastic. This is an author I definitely need to read more by. And last up, why not finish with a classic haunted house story? This is The House Next Door by Anne Rivers Siddons. But this isn't really your typical haunted house story. It's about a new house that is built in a wealthy neighbourhood, and horrible things start to happen to anyone involved in this house. And the story is told from the perspective of the next door neighbours. This one is really well written and such an excellent read. Okay, so now on to some horror films, and I wanted to mention some that I don't hear talked about as often. I feel like if you search online for horror films directed by women, you tend to get the same handful of films over and over again. And while you should absolutely watch American Psycho, directed by Mary Harron, The Invitation and Jennifer's Body, directed by Karen Kusama, Near Dark, directed by Catherine Bigelow, like those are all fantastic films that you should definitely check out if you haven't already. But I wanted to take the opportunity here to mention some maybe lesser known films, or at least ones that I don't hear talked about very much. And to mention some films from all around the world, so yeah, hopefully there are some here that you might not have heard of before. First up, from 1978, is The House of the Dead, directed by Sharon Miller. This is an anthology film, so a bunch of short films within one wraparound story. There are some really clever and interesting ideas in here, and it has a really cool framing device following a character who finds himself in a funeral home. Okay, next up from 1982 is The Slumber Party Massacre, directed by Amy Holden Jones, and yeah, the title is fairly self-explanatory. We're following a group of girls who are having a slumber party and there's a killer on the loose. Really fun, really underrated, and there are 2 sequels which are also well worth checking out. The Slumber Party Massacre 2, directed by Deborah Brock, and The Slumber Party Massacre 3, directed by Sally Mattison. They all use the same kind of concept about a slumber party massacre, of course, but they each have their own style, and I think they're all well worth checking out. I really enjoy all of them. Next up, from 1990, is Mirror Mirror, directed by Marina Sargentini. This is about a teenage girl and her mother who move to a new town, and they move into this old house, and in this girl's bedroom there is this old mirror which has some kind of special things going on. The main character has some awesome goth vibes, and there are some really great like supernatural and witchcraft elements to the story. There's a bit of a Craft feel, even though this came out some years before The Craft. Moving over to Canada, and from 1995 is Blood and Donuts, directed by Holly Dale. This is a pretty unique vampire story. It's a pretty low budget indie film and it's got a kind of quirky comedy element to it. It also has a cameo from the one and only David Cronenberg. So if that doesn't make you want to check this out, I don't know what will. Another Canadian film from 1996 is Kissed, directed by Lynn Stopkovich. And this one is a drama rather than horror, but I wanted to mention it here because I do think it fits into a kind of horror adjacent category because the subject matter is necrophilia. And this film is definitely not your kind of necromantic style, although I would totally still recommend that film if you have the stomach for it. But Kissed is more of a character study. This follows a character played by the wonderful Molly Parker, who has a fascination with death. It's a really unique film that I never hear anyone talk about, and it's really quite a beautiful film too, which is a bit strange considering the subject matter. Next up, from 1999, is Ravenous from British director Antonia Bird, and is about a remote military outpost in the 19th century and some cannibal activity that they encounter. This one is another one with its own unique style. It's got a bit of kind of like a quirky comedy to it as well, and a fantastic performance from Robert Carlyle especially. Yeah, this one is really bloody and really fun. Okay, moving over to Germany. And from 2013 is Nothing Bad Can Happen by Katrin Gebe. This is about a character who is part of a Jesus Freaks group, and one day he meets this other guy who he sees as needing saving, and they form a kind of friendship, but it turns very dark as this other man is very sadistic, and the main character sees all of the things that are happening to him as being some kind of test from God. And this is honestly one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen, and I've seen a fair few. It is grim and disturbing and upsetting, and yeah, not going to be for everyone, but I do think it's a really brilliant film that I don't hear talked about nearly enough. Okay, moving on to something a little lighter and over to Japan, we have Fatal Frame from 2014, directed by Mari Asato. This is based on the video game Fatal Frame, also known as Project Zero, which is about kind of capturing ghosts in a camera. And while that element does feature a little bit in the film, it's not really the focus of the story. So know that going into it, else you might be disappointed. But instead, this is more of a supernatural drama, I would say, than like full-on horror. It is set in a girls' boarding school, and some of the girls start to disappear, and we're following some characters as we try to find out what is happening. This one features some lesbian characters, and that is a really big part of the story, which I thought was really cool and really interesting because horror isn't nearly as diverse in that respect as it should be. And yeah, this one I just really liked the style and the atmosphere of it, so yeah, definitely worth checking out. Okay, next up, moving over to Ireland, and from 2019 is Sea Fever, directed by Nasser Hardiman. This is about a group of people on a trawler out at sea and something strange that they encounter. This is a low-budget indie film. It has a really good cast and a really interesting story and some really good effects. If you like horror films set at sea, or if you like sci-fi horror, then definitely check this one out. And last up, moving over to India, from 2020 is Bulbul, directed by Anvita Dutt. This one is a mixture of historical drama with some romance and some kind of dark fantasy and horror elements. It's absolutely beautifully shot. The cast is awesome, and it's following this family and there is a local myth that there is a female demon who kills men. This one does play out as more of a drama for a lot of the film, but it does have some horror elements, and there are a couple of particularly brutal, violent scenes which I wasn't quite expecting. So yeah, this is a really interesting one that, again, I haven't heard anyone talk about, so I definitely recommend checking it out. So those were a handful of recommendations to celebrate Women in Horror Month. Let me know if you've read or seen any of these, and definitely shout out some recommendations of your own. I also have a video with recommendations to celebrate Black History Month, so please go check that one out too. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!